ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots podcast, a Syracuse Orange Nation podcast on the Fans First Sports Network. Christian and Guzman here, alongside Andy Pregler. For once, Steve actually isn't here, and somehow we can actually run this broadcast. So hopefully this goes well.
What's the worst that could happen? We're not going to burn down the internet or anything.
That would be a feat that would be very, very impressive.
It would be, but honestly, like at this point, like, you know, we're just going to rebrand this podcast to the X Orange podcast. That's all.
I mean, God, if there even is an orange to begin with in the next, 10 years.
I just don't want to learn another social media. Like, I'm old, I'm annoying. I don't want to learn a new one. Like, that just seems like so much effort.
I mean, that's why I really slowly started getting into TikTok this year, because like you said, I didn't want to. I already had Twitter, already Instagram. Don't want to put in the extra effort of trying to figure out the TikTok algorithm.
It's just too much. There's just too much happening, and I don't like it. And I'm old, and the world is changing, and it makes me scared. You know what is not changing, Christian? The fact that the basketball tournament is being played. And it is a thing that is happening. I say it in that manner because I feel like it's pretty obvious that as a Syracuse fan base, this started off as something that encapsulated, I would say, the basketball hardcore section of the fan base, then spread to the general fan base, and has now somehow come back around to only being the hardcore basketball section of the fan base caring about this event, which is a very weird thing to happen, but is not uncommon with fandoms. But it does feel like every year that we do this, there are people who care about this, but the number is dramatically dropping.
Well, then also you're getting the fact that there are less recognizable names on this team now. Like, there's no longer an Eric Devendorf that like most people can attach to. And due to the fact that at the height of its popularity, it was 2020, 2021, and people were looking for anything to watch on TV because of COVID. And other than the MLB regular season, that was like the first big major sports thing to like really return to a somewhat full capacity in terms of, fans in attendance and a sporting event that were like a grand spectacle. So that it was good that Boehm's Army won during that time, but that was the height of its popularity. And like you said, now it's just the really, really hardcore fans, I think, that are really interested in what's happening at OCC in a few days' time.
It's not at OCC this year.
Oh, right. It isn't. They upgraded.
It is. Yes, it is at the On Center, I do believe.
It indeed is.
Or whatever the thing is called.
Whatever sponsor they have for it now.
Yeah, exactly. But it is interesting to see. I mean, the hardest thing that I can say about this is that we got into a point where we know enough about this tournament to say we know nothing about this tournament. It was different when we were dealing because I think the reality is that we were in a position where the team was a bunch of recent grads who we had very recently seen perform, and now that's not necessarily the case. That being said, that's real. Like you kind of mentioned it. There's not a whole lot of the same players. I think the biggest one is that Chris McCullough is going to be playing for TBT. And I think one of the more interesting things about that is that McCullough is a player who we never really saw on the court. And now we're going to see him play more orange basketball games for Boeheim's Army than we've seen him play in a Syracuse jersey.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure like most average Syracuse fans couldn't tell you who Chris McCullough was, even though he was a very hyped prospect coming into his time in Syracuse, and then blew out his ACL halfway through the season and left for the NBA. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things that's also happening on this team is that Malachi Richardson has been a late addition to the roster. He's somebody who we haven't really seen play. Like he was getting a nice look at in the G League and never really made the jump. Tyus Battle was playing in China, according to a Donna Datota article published today. He was playing in China as recently as Monday, and is not going to be available for Boeheim's Army's opener, but will be available if they are able to play, if they win and they play a second game, which on the one hand, great, glad he's available. On the other hand, I can't imagine him coming in and having that large of an impact when the team has normally been pretty light on squad rotation. But the rest of the roster that we're looking at is Richardson, Battle if the Orange win, Chris McCullough, Pascal Chukwu, Rakeem Christmas, Jimmy Boeheim, Andrew White, BJ Johnson, Matt Morgan, DeAndre Kane, Jameel Wilson, Grant Riller, and Dwight Bucks Jr. We know Kane is probably going to start. I would bet that Wilson, Ryler, and Bucks are all going to get minutes. I don't know if they'll start. McCullough was, as tweeted out by Donna, is going to be starting for the Orange. And I would imagine the person that Orange fans are probably most excited to see is Rakeem. But
yeah.
I honestly haven't kept up on his overseas career. Battle's the one that I'd be most interested to see what his game has developed into while playing overseas, and feels like somebody who would do well in a TBT setting.
And you'd feel like the main scoring would come from Battle and Kane. Essentially, that those are going to be our main guys who prototypically in this day and age of basketball seem like the guys who could play more isolation ball, like Battle did during his time at Syracuse. He was an ISO guard. Unfortunately, Donna did also tweet out that Matt Morgan won't be available, unfortunately, because after a great year in the French league, he's getting looks at other leagues and getting some decent money, apparently, to play for them. So rather not risk it during this tournament, which is understandable. She also did actually tweet out in an article today, I think, that Sean Belby, the Boeheim's Army GM, said that Malachi actually will likely not play. So we will, but we'll see how that works out as well, because that's also a guy, even though, like you said, Andy, rotation has been light-ish in TBT. It's a scoring option that could have been useful off the bench. But without that, your main isolation 2-3 scoring in that position is down to Battle and Kane. And Kane's probably going to have to carry the brunt of that, at least in the first game. And then hopefully get something from a Jimmy Boeheim, from a Rakeem Christmas, from Tyler Robinson. Like it's tough, because this seems like it's in terms of the Syracuse no names, it's a front court heavy team. You can even throw BJ Johnson in there as well. He's more of a front court guy instead of like the typical smaller 2-3 scorer, even though he later became a more prominent scorer at LaSalle when he transferred from Syracuse. So it will be interesting to see how the scoring dynamic of this team works out.
Yeah, I don't know if Boeheim's Army is going to like make a run with the team that they have, but it's also so much of it is going to depend on the opposition that we just don't know very well. I think, as we've seen in this tournament, it's about certain players getting hot Boeheim's Army has benefited that, whether it's been an Eric Devendorf, whether it's been a DeAndre Kane, whether it's been an Andrew White. There's been lots of players who we came into this tournament and mostly overlooked. And a lot of it just comes into which guys are in competitive shape, because I do think one of the positives of this tournament is that the format and the money that is on the line has players going at 110%. There's not a whole lot of players holding back in their game, because for most of them, this is the last chance at a payday on U.S. soil, unless something crazy happens. So I think that we are in a position where I like the roster. I don't love the roster. I think that it's funny, we talk about Syracuse's recruiting struggles, but I think this is another thing that happens when the recruiting just isn't there, is that the alumni pool that you can pull from is just not going to be as strong. And I think that we saw in those early years of Boeheim's Army that the players that were coming back were still incredibly good, and had a lot of talent, and had you have somebody like Devendorf, who's kind of that glue guy who's willing to do a little bit of whatever is necessary, but the rest of the team is pretty filled out. And so I'm interested to see what happens with it. Again, I don't think we're really all going in with that many expectations, but it'll be interesting to see how Boeheim's Army performs given the new the new mix of players that are in and out. But continuing to talk about basketball, there was a piece of basketball news that broke this week. The Orange added what I can only imagine is one of their last non-conference basketball games for the season. Syracuse will be going to Washington, D.C. on December the 9th to play Georgetown. This game was expected, but not guaranteed. And so the 99th meeting between Georgetown and Syracuse will take place this year in December. Christian, I'm curious as to your thoughts. I personally like this game, not just because it's Syracuse Georgetown, but based off of how we're looking at the non-conference schedule so far, I actually think the Georgetown game is probably good for this team in playing a less talented but still highly competitive game, considering how stacked so much of the non-conference schedule looks right now.
Well, hopefully it's a competitive game in terms of actually it's good teams instead of, what's happened the last couple of years, which is Georgetown really being really bad and somehow giving Syracuse a whole load of trouble, which is just not ideal. That's gonna be the trap.
I mean, well, it's 100% a trap game, but it's one that you can circle because the storylines around this game are going to write themselves, because the last time that these two teams played, it was Jim Boeheim versus Patrick Ewing, and now this time it's Ed Cooley versus Adrian Autry, who are two players that, if you don't remember, went against each other back in the heyday of the Big East. Autry at Syracuse, Cooley at Providence, and it feels like both guys are trying to do the same thing at their respective schools, where the way things were going were not good. And both coaches are coming in with a very new school approach to these old school basketball programs.
And especially in the case of Autry, it's a basketball approach that we have no idea what we're getting at, especially given the slate of games that Syracuse has ahead of that Georgetown game. It's going to be hard to get a read of how good Syracuse actually is, especially since most people are going to expect Syracuse to get absolutely shellacked in the Maui tournament. And in Georgetown's case, I'm not sure what mid-November tournament they're participating in, if any, but they are it's more so of also with Cooley, what you're getting from him based on what he did at Providence, which was pretty good. So you know what style of basketball you're going to get from him. It's just a case of, is the talent going to be there, especially after, all the main guys like Primo Spears left from Georgetown and how that team gels now.
Yeah, they actually are going. It's actually really interesting for them. They're playing in the Gavitt tip-off games which is a preseason tournament among Northeast schools. They're going to be playing Rutgers. They don't have. There's something called Georgetown MTE on their schedule where they're going to be playing Mount St. Mary's and American back-to-back days in early November. And then they've got games against Jackson State and Merrimack scheduled. So it doesn't look like they're participating yet in a big Thanksgiving week tournament. But they will be Syracuse will be rolling into the Georgetown game with a game against Cornell. Meanwhile, Georgetown will be playing in the Big East Big 12 Challenge, and they've got TCU and our old friend Jamie Dixon.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that game will be, watching bricks and stones being thrown about. But
it'll be it'll be a good defense trying to stop what can be described as an offense.
Yeah, and I think for me the biggest thing, aside from like getting this game on the calendar because fans like this game and it gives me an excuse to go down to Washington D.C. in December, which I absolutely love, is that looking at the schedule right now, Syracuse has its 2 exhibition games, but the rest of the non-conference is I would call it 3 gimme games in New Hampshire, Canisius, and Niagara. And then you've got the Cornell game on
Colgate's become also.
And then Colgate on November 14th. Those are 2 games that I think are like obvious traps. The Georgetown game is an additional. I would actually put Georgetown in the same category as the Oregon game on December 17th. Oregon is a program that is a bit lost right now. And I think that those are games that Syracuse, if they are what we think they are, should be favored in those 2 matchups. But that'll be a good game where the team probably has to play locked in basketball and mistake-free basketball in order to actually, meet those expectations. And I think those games are good because, like, as you mentioned, they've got LSU in the ACC SEC Challenge, which is at home, thankfully. And then they've got the 3 Maui games, which we don't know the matchups for that yet, but there's a non-zero chance that Syracuse is playing 3 teams that made it into last year's Elite 8. And that is just terrifying.
And if we go off what the ACC schedule has usually been over the past couple of years, in between that LSU and Georgetown game, you probably expect an ACC game in between there as well. So it just becomes.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So it just becomes an absolute firing line of Maui, then LSU, then ACC game, and then Georgetown, Oregon. And depending on where that ACC game is, if it's at home, great. It's probably going to be on the road because ACC is probably going to schedule them on the road after being at home for LSU, which means you're going to have 3 road tests. One being a neutral site, but in South Dakota, but essentially 3 road tests against teams that theoretically, as long as Syracuse doesn't get against a 50-50, really has a realistic 50-50 shot of getting matched up against a team that they should beat in that first ACC game. If they get a very favorable matchup, you've got 3 games after Maui where you should be able to get some sort of a resume booster early on in December, and that's where wins become really, really crucial.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really obvious about this year's ACC is that the conference is not going to be good. The conference
that's literally a pace and repeat of the last 3 years in the ACC.
Right, but I think the last 3 years it was pretty obvious like which teams were going to fit in which like there's the top, then there's the tournament qualifying teams, and then there's the bad teams. And I think it was always really obvious the last few years, like which teams were going to fit in each bucket. But like with, obviously the disappointment teams and the surprise teams in and throughout. I think this year it's obvious which teams are going to be really good at the top of the ACC. You're looking at Duke, you're looking at UNC, you're looking maybe.
Yeah. Are we saying Virginia?
I was gonna say maybe Virginia, just because of like the
Me
coaching
too.
pedigree, but like that's it. And then I think this is where it's different, because I think literally the entire rest of the conference has pieces in place to do something, excluding Wake Forest, Georgia Tech. Like I think those are really the only two programs.
Notre Dame also is not looking great after Mike Brey's retirement.
Yes. So I think outside, like pretty much, so we just listed 3 schools at the top, but really 2 schools, and then 3 schools at the bottom. And I'm willing to give Georgia Tech a pass because like they're, for whatever reason, squirrely when it comes to conference play. And then everybody else is going to fit somewhere in the, like, are they a tournament team? Are they a bad team? Or are they going to rise up and be the level that, Duke and UNC are at? And I think the tricky part for Syracuse is like when we're talking about these early season games, the ACC doesn't put UNC Duke that early. It will do a Syracuse UVA that early in order to have a marquee game to get people to tune in to the ACC network or ESPN's ACC game or whatever. They'll go to those like B list like starring matchups. And to me, that's like the concerning part, is that I want all of those games against UNC, Duke, Virginia, whoever ends up being the top half of the ACC. I want those in the back half of the schedule, because the Maui tournament, I'm legitimately I think we've seen this in the past. These tough stretches of non-conference games don't necessarily break Syracuse. They do break Syracuse when they immediately roll into an ACC tough slate. Like if we're going to get battered in Maui, which is what I think will happen, I want to have some games in between there for the team to like figure it out and get some momentum back and figure out what the winning strategy is going to be. But obviously the ACC schedule is not out yet. I don't think we know when the ACC basketball schedule is coming out. So we are going to have to wait and see.
And here's the tricky thing is also, I lost my train of thought, but like, the tricky thing is that Syracuse, like you said, is probably going to have to face up against one of those big teams. Also, somewhere in the corner, Boston College is pumping its fist like, yes, we made it out of the bottom 5. Thank God.
Oh, I forgot about BC. Yeah, we could throw BC in there too.
But actually, Quentin Post isn't, bad, but, who the rest of BC is. Yeah. Good on BC for being a forgotten team in the ACC. But so like Syracuse isn't going to get a BC. It might luck out and get a Wake Forest because, that for some reason has been a, prime matchup the ACC likes to advertise. But like, honestly, here's what I could see them doing. And this would be fun in weird ways. Syracuse Clemson. Because remember who's on Clemson now.
Joe Girard is going to go off on Clemson, or go off on Syracuse, isn't he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't like that.
How many people want to have the Chris Paul meme ready for when Joe hits a 3 late in the game? So many people are going to want to have that meme ready. You know what that meme is?
I don't like. Yes, I do, and I don't like this, but it's going to happen. And I don't like it. I don't like any of this. But you're right. I think a Clemson would be a great game. If I am the ACC, yes,
that's what's going to get people to tune in the first week of December. That's what's going to get students to stop studying for finals.
Watching Joe Girard in orange come to the Carrier Dome. Oh man, you're just
No,
you've
I
got
mean
all the
Clemson's going to wear platinum jerseys like they did a couple of years ago.
ugh. Well, we do know that platinum in the dome doesn't work, so that actually does bode well for us.
Except that one time against Virginia Tech football.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, that was a great win, but like, man, those jerseys are forgettable.
Mhm.
Uh Speaking of platinum jerseys, the men's soccer team, which sometimes wears a platinum jersey for reasons that I don't like. Actually, I think it's the women's soccer team that wears a platinum jersey,
Yeah,
but
it's
we're
the
going to use
women.
it to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk
We
about
could
the
talk
men's
about the
team
women
anyway.
also.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the men's soccer schedule came out.
Oh, it did.
And the reason I bring this up is because the schedule is always a little bit wonky for men's soccer, mostly just because, again, it is a single season sport, even though there is a desire to make it a multi-season sport. But the defending national champions, never gets old, the defending national champions are looking at a relatively home-loaded schedule. They're only going to go on the road to play their ACC foes and Cornell on my birthday, which can't wait for that nervous fest, and to play Penn State. The rest of their schedule is at the Syracuse soccer field, and they'll be welcoming Providence, Binghamton, Albany, Siena, Colgate, and Temple, and Yale. Lots of teams in there. And their ACC slate is on the road. Like the biggest things is that they have to go on the road to play North Carolina, Duke, and Wake Forest. None of those games are at home. They do get Pitt at home. They get Clemson at home. They get Louisville at home. But that road ACC slate is not fun.
Getting
but
Pitt, Clemson, and NC State at home is pretty big.
It is. It's just that like the road games against like getting a result.
The road games against the other 3 Carolina teams are tough.
Yeah, it's getting a result in any of those 3 games is going to be very difficult. Which, as a reminder, I think last year all 3 of those games were at home, were they not?
I believe so. I don't think they played. I don't remember if they played Duke or not, but I don't think they played UNC until the tournament, which was which of course was at the soccer stadium because of seating.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that I'm looking at the 2022 schedule right now just to confirm our hypotheses here. Yeah. So last year they did play Penn State at the SU Soccer Stadium, so they're making that return trip as part of a home and home. Yeah, they did not play. They played Wake Forest at the soccer stadium. They won that game 2-0 in a big turning point for the season. And yeah, they didn't play. They played UNC only in the postseason. So, and they did not play Duke at all. So that is tough. And again, Cornell, they're going on the road and playing who gave them a hell of a time in the NCAA tournament. Yeah. So I like the schedule. I think it's definitely a good schedule to go, and there's lots of opportunities to watch them play. But this title defense is definitely like it's just a reminder, if you are in the ACC in any sport that is not men's football or men's basketball, every single one of the Carolina schools is going to be good and be very difficult.
Especially the ones on Tobacco Road.
Yeah, it is. It's just so annoying.
As always.
Cool. So this is the part of the show where I'm pretty sure there has been no actual other news happening.
Yeah. I do want to quickly mention one thing while we're on the soccer train. FIFA Women's World Cup is on right now, and if you're looking for a team to root for other than the United States, go cheer on Ireland, because Syracuse, former Syracuse starting keeper Courtney Brosnan is the starting keeper for Ireland. Only let up a penalty in their first game. So, but from all things considered, looked like she had a pretty good game. And her first game was against Australia, right? I believe. Or was it New
Yes,
Zealand?
and it was Australia. They lost to the co-hosts in the opening game. Yes, in the penalty, and ironically enough, they will be taking on Canada Wednesday at 8 a.m. And on the Canadian women's team is another former
Yes.
Syracuse keeper. I do not know how to say her name because it is aggressively French.
Yeah, Lizzie-Anne Prolou.
Yeah, there we go. What Christian just said. I did not
we
take
get
French.
enough Canadians in Syracuse that like it should be like a requirement for Syracuse to like teach some French.
Yeah,
even though every Newhouse kid like us would protest the hell out of it.
Yeah, but you gotta do a little bit of Quebecois in order to make that work.
Oh god.
Yeah. So good things happening in the Syracuse land. This is a short show, mostly just because we are kind of bereft of news at the moment. But one thing that I did realize that we probably should have mentioned is, when is Boeheim's Army's first game? Because it is tomorrow, Christian. What time? And you can watch it on ESPN. But what time is the game at?
I believe it's 7 p.m. and it's against Team Gibson.
Love that. There we go. So tomorrow at 7 on ESPN. Watch the game. If they win, yay. If they lose, I don't think we'll have a whole lot to talk about other than so sad. Kind of knew that this is going to be a weird year, but hey, let's see what happens.
And obviously, we'll get more and longer podcasts as the fall ball season reaches and slowly comes. If you missed most of our football preview, we did in our like quote unquote return podcast last week with Steve as well, where we talked about all the trials and tribulations of what actually happened with Syracuse football this past off season, because it was a lot for those living under a rock.
Yeah, and I think also as we get closer to camp, the biggest thing that will happen is we'll find out about injury news that obviously is kept under wraps, but will be less under wraps when reporters are allowed for the first 10 minutes. Oh, baseball.
Okay.
I always have something. Yeah. And I almost dropped it. But yeah, that'll be fall ball. So yeah, I think the run of show will be next week. Christian and Steve will talk. I will not be around because I will be at my brother's bachelor party on a plane returning. So I will not be here next week to talk about whatever happens with Boeheim's Army. But hopefully we're talking about multiple games and not just one, because something would be nice.
Yeah, because it's, other than the whole football debacle, it's actually been a relatively quiet offseason compared to the other off seasons that we've had.
Christian, you just jinxed it.
And I'm waiting for a tweet from Mike Waters.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, kidding.
Actually, that brings up something we could talk about to close off this. I have to go back in our Slack because John Wildhack did have a press conference, I believe, earlier this week on Tuesday. And
he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason why we didn't talk about it is I don't want to out the people that were talking about it in the Slack, because I think that there were some things that we were all kind of saying, like, in a way that we definitely would not love. Like, it's more opinion, but yeah, Wildhack is in a position where I don't think we trust 50% of what comes out of his mouth anymore. I am comfortable enough to say that on the record, that I firmly do not trust him in whenever he's in front of a microphone, because at this point I think it's really obvious that he is even if he doesn't outright lie, he's not giving you an answer other than the answer that he wants the fans to have, even if we all know it's bullshit. Case in point, why did Carrier get taken off of the Dome labeling years before the contract expired? No rhyme or reason. is like, come on, dude. If you're gonna lie better.
Yeah, like so like one of the things that he said about like Liquid Allen, I'm pleased that there's a resolution. It's all about moving ahead and moving forward. Pleased that everyone that there's a resolution and we're moving forward, which was just 2 lines of saying, "Yay, it happened. Let's move on," instead of like anything else sort of concrete about it.
Yeah, and I think I think this is the point of the LeQuinn Allen situation, and we talked about it again. Go the episode that Christian mentioned. We knew that whenever the resolution came forward, we probably won't know the full story until years from now when Allen is no longer associated with Syracuse University. That's when we'll probably get the full story, because it seems as if WildHack is more than happy to just refuse to answer questions, which again, credit to Mike Waters for really trying to do all he can to get WildHack to say something else. But when a guy doesn't want to answer a question and he's just going to respond with what is essentially, I plead my Fifth Amendment rights, there's only so much you can do.
Indeed.
On that note, we definitely did not plead our Fifth Amendment rights, but we are the Disloyal Idiots podcast, the Fans First Nation podcast. We appreciate the support as always. Make sure to tune in next week as we break down all the TBT action. Well, we being Christian and Steve, I will be on a plane. Make sure to like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. It helps us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you to those who are watching this on Twitch. We really do appreciate the support. We do this most nights, Sunday night, timing to TBD, but we tweet it out. So again, follow us on Twitter, X, whatever it may be. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. We got all the socials. And we will continue to update you as we get closer and closer to that magical date that is fall sports kickoff in August. For Steve, who is not here, for Christian, for myself, for all of us here at the Disloyal Idiots, thank you so much, and go Orange.
Go Orange.